Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of Casual Criminalist. This one written by Emma, read by me, never read it before, never heard of it before. The Various Crimes of Arsenic, Inc. Wait, like Arsenic Incorporated? I feel like if you tried to register, you'd be like, yeah, well, you want to call your company Arsenic? And people would be like, not sure that's a good idea. Like, your lawyer would come back to you being like, you sure, bro? Are you sure? Thank you, Emma, for writing it. Let's just jump in, shall we? Paul Petrillo was born in Naples, Italy in 1893, and Herman Petrillo was born in a small village in the Campania province in 1899. At the time, Italy was suffering economically following the Italian unification that took place in 1861. I feel like Italy suffering economically. It's just like, when has Italy not been suffering economically? Wait, there was that time, right? Before they were on the euro, when they were still on like the Italian rupee or whatever the f***. And they were like, there was that clever thing they did where they used their currency control to make products made in Italy cheaper, but still good for countries on the euro. And it was this really clever economic thing. And then they took the euro and it was like, it kind of all went to shit. And I'm like, yeah, that's unfortunate. And many of southern Italy's inhabitants lived in poverty. Cholera and typhoid outbreaks were common in Naples, and there were 12 separate outbreaks between 1834 and 1884, which claimed the lives of 48,000 people. This led to what has since become known as the Italian diaspora, the mass emigration of 13 million Italians to various parts of the world, mostly the US and South America. The 17-year-old Paul, 11-year-old Herman, and their respective families emigrated to the US in 1910, and they would later settle in Philadelphia, where they made a home for themselves in the rapidly growing Italian community that lived between the 1600 and 1900 blocks of Pass-Shunk Avenue in South Philadelphia, an area that would later become known as Little Italy. Because they lived so close to one another, the residents of Pass-Shunk Avenue were able to continue practicing their traditions and held on to their beliefs, which included their belief in the evil eye. Okay. What the fuck is the evil eye? They believed that if someone had the evil eye placed on them, they would be more prone to misfortune, unluckiness, and illness. Oh, so it's not real. In return, masters of the evil eye, aka faith healers, sold amulets and potions called La Fattura that protected their clients against the evil eye. In some cases, could heal them of any illness that had been caused by placing the evil eye on them. No, they can't. You'd be like, oh, what's wrong with you? Oh, I got typhus. And it's like, how'd you get that? Oh, I got the evil eye. Well, just go to the faith healer. They'll get rid of the evil eye and boom! Your typhus is gone. Except it doesn't work like that because the evil eye is not real. Faith healing is not real. Typhus is real. Typhus is a real and terrible disease. Does typhus exist anymore? I feel like that's one of the ones like consumption. What's that called? What's the modern word for consumption? It's not cholera. It's the one... is it? Oh, God damn it. What is... Everyone's screaming like, Simon, it's this. It's the one that affects your lungs. Tuberculosis. Boom. Yeah, like that. It's like one of those historical diseases that is like, yeah. If someone told you they got it, like there'd be, you'd be like, whoa, dude, where did you go? The past? Or like some very, very undeveloped country with no doctors? Sorry to interrupt, but have you ever woken up and you feel like your day is missing that nutritional oomph, or ever found yourself reaching for that extra cup of coffee just to keep things going? Well, I used to be there, but then I discovered something great that changed the game for me, and that is AG1. So why AG1? Well, first off, the taste. It looks very green. You might be thinking, oh God, what does this taste like? Well, it actually tastes great. Vanilla, pineapple-y. Great way to start the day, but it's not just about taste, it's also about how it makes you feel. AG1 has become a ritual for me. Every morning, I shake this up and I enjoy it. It replaces a whole bunch of stuff. Multivitamins, minerals, probiotics, and more, all in one scoop. You take it from this can, you dump it in here, you shake it up. It comes in a bag like this, but you transfer it into this when you first get it. Keep it in the fridge. It's good stuff. It's not just about what's in it, though. It's about what's not in it. No artificial stuff, no GMOs. It's gluten-free. It's dairy-free. AG1 is quality. It's NSF certified for sport. It's a gold standard. AG1 is a daily foundational nutritional supplement that supports whole body health. Plus, you can get a 1-year supply of immune-supporting AG Vitamin D3 plus K2 and 5 AG1 travel packs free with your first purchase, so you can stay healthy on the go. When I go traveling somewhere, I pack a few of these bad boys and you're good to go. So if you're ready to simplify your wellness routine and invest in your health, click the link below or head to drinkag1.com/TCC. Thanks to AG1 for not just sponsoring this video, but for making my mornings awesome. And now back to today's episode. Paul was a firm believer in the evil eye, and he wore several amulets and lucky rabbit's feet to ward off against it. This dude's just rolling around with all sorts of accoutrements. His amulets seemed to be doing their job, and Paul and his family thrived. Maybe I should be getting amulets. I feel like, I don't know, like I'm pretty, I feel like, I don't know if I describe myself as thriving, but I do pretty well. And I feel like shit, I've got like mostly my shit feels pretty together. But I wear 0 amulets. So what does that mean? Checkmate, amulets. Paul had trained as a tailor, and he opened a tailor shop in the early 1920s, calling it Paul Petrillo, custom tailor to the classy dressers. He did well for himself. I feel like there's definitely a joke in there about the name of his shop. I'm not smart enough to come up with it. Come up with it. Come up with it? Yeah, that's the right way of saying that. I thought I said come with it up for a second, which is just more pointing out how small my brain is. He did well for himself, dressed in only the finest suits. Well, it'd be a bit weird if he didn't, because if he just like rolled up for work, well, he could just roll up for work, I don't know, like in a Nike tracksuit or whatever, Nike tracksuit Americans or whatever, and just be like, yeah, well, I'm the tailor, aren't I? No one can make a suit that is good enough for me, and I can't measure myself. You could probably measure yourself. I once had to measure myself for a sponsor, and I measured myself, and I thought I did a pretty good job. They were like, you could go to one of our measuring shops. And I'm like, oh, where's the closest one? New York. And I'm like, well, it's pretty far, isn't it, actually? Or you could just measure yourself at home. And so I'm like, cool, I'll just measure myself at home. So I whip out a tape measure, have my wife help me with it. And I'm like, not a tape measure, like one of those cloth ones. And I'm like, it's pretty good. Seems to work pretty well. And I've had tailored suits before. And it's like, but with an actual tailor. And then it arrives, and I'm like, either, I don't know, it didn't fit brilliantly. And I don't think we went through with the sponsorship, but it was okay. It was fine. Fine is how I would describe it. But a mate of mine, who's American, he also got hooked up with one, and he was like, Simon, it's really good. And I'm not sure if that's just because he was like, it's just, I don't know. He doesn't, I can't imagine he's much of a suit wearing dude. Not that I am, but he was like, dude, it fits great. And I'm like, I guess I screwed up the measuring then. Why am I telling this story? No one cares. Just carry on with a bloody episode, Whistle. What's wrong with you? Did I just tell, I swear, I just told a 10-minute story off the back of this dude just being a tailor. I'm sorry. I don't know what's wrong with me. I really don't. And by 1929, the 30-year-old Paul, his sickly wife Angela, and their 7 children, that passed everybody, moved into a house that he bought for $2,200. Or $39,598.58 today. It'll probably say, if you're measuring the inflation in cents, it'll be like, well, it's actually 59 by the time this episode goes out. In cash. I mean, yeah, it's 40 grand in today's money. If he's successful, he's probably got 40 grand knocking around. Jesus Christ, if you want to buy a house and you put a 10% down payment on it, you don't get many houses for or at least, I always think of England. I don't know why, it's always where I default to. But you don't get many houses, or where I live now, you don't get many apartments for $400,000. And if you're putting a 10% down payment down, you've got to have 40 grand in cash, which obviously is not attainable for regular, most people. But they say he's very successful, so he's probably got 40 grand lying around, doesn't he? Paul's cousin, Herman Petrillo, was more of a realist and originally trained as a barber in New York. That's why I'm saying he become a realist. Have dreams! What's your name? Herman. But when that didn't work out, he became a spaghetti and olive oil salesman. I'm not sure if Emma's joking there, but that's the most Italian thing I've ever heard. Business seemed to be doing well since Herman was driving around in brand new cars, wore fancy suits, and always had money to spend. However, this might be because Herman liked to dabble in illegal activities such as bootlegging, arson, fraud, and money laundering. Oh my God. I feel like arson, burning bootlegging. He's just making a little extra alcohol on the side. Fraud? Who doesn't do fraud? Money laundering, please. That's everybody. But arson's burning down. People will die. Herman would torch well-insured buildings by Oh, okay. So he's mixing that fraud and arson. By placing homemade gasoline bombs in their basements. Later, he'd buy properties, registered them in his wife's name, invest in expensive insurance properties, and have them torched after a few months, using the proceeds to pay for his newest car. He would finally be arrested on suspicion of arson in 1937, but since the fire marshals didn't have enough evidence to convict him of anything, Herman was allowed to walk free. But Herman wasn't the only member of his family who liked to dabble. Paul's tailor shop was a favorite hangout for the more well-off members of their community, and he hosted several insurance agents in his store. He'd listen to them as they made their pitches to his clients, and they were the ones who taught Paul how to gamble with the lives of his neighbors. According to Gaetano Cicianto, an insurance agent who used to work out of Paul's tailor shop. They would sell life insurance policies to their clients, but if they noted their client wasn't long for the world, they'd purchase inexpensive life insurance policies in the client's name, insuring them for an amount below the low-risk threshold of $500. They'd then list themselves as a beneficiary and keep a copy of the policy on file until their client inevitably passed away. What? Can you just take out a random life insurance policy on an old person? Be like, I don't know, like, what's his face? That super rich Warren Buffett. I was trying to think of because Charlie Munger recently died as I'm recording this, and for some reason, the more famous Warren Buffett escaped my mind. Tiny brain, remember? I can't go and take out a life insurance policy on Warren Buffett. I don't know Warren Buffett. Surely Warren Buffett has to sign off on this. They'd then list themselves as a beneficiary, keep a copy of the policy on file until their client inevitably passed away. The cost of these policies was a monthly payment of just 20 cents, and best of all, the insurance company didn't require any medical exams to be done. Initially, Paul took out insurance policies on veterans of World War I who had developed chronic lung conditions following their time in the trenches and kept the policies locked in a drawer in his desk. Later, Paul advertised his services as a faith healer named Professor Paul P. Pattrell and hosted divine healing and private readings in the back room of his shop. So what do you do? Oh, yeah. Is this the guy who's the tailor? There's already too many characters. Yes, cool. So he's a tailor. He's doing a little bit of insurance fraud and arson. And he's also like, yeah, I'm also a faith healer. It's like, what else do you do? I also make pizza. I do a little list, import, export. I don't know, like, what are you doing? Why do you have so many jobs? This way, prospective clients would come to him for help with their various ailments, and he'd sell the more sickly ones and their families' life insurance policies just in case his treatments were unsuccessful. According to Paul, he placed the evil eye on each and every one of his clients, essentially marking them for death. But in 1930, the Great Depression happened, and Paul's side income eventually became his only income. He had a pile of insurance policies lying in his drawer, but his curses weren't working, and his clients weren't dying fast enough. Uh-oh. He's thinking, why aren't they dying fast enough? I know, I'll kill them. That's where this is going, isn't it? Oh, He complained to Herman that he had to find a way to hasten their trips to death's door, and Herman reassured him that it wasn't that difficult to off someone, or as he put it, send them to California. To prove his point, Herman befriended the 50-year-old Ralph Caruso. Is he like, yo, Paul, watch this, see what happens over the next week? And then this Ralph dude starts showing up, and then Ralph's dead, isn't he? And Paul's like, what happened to Ralph, Herman? And Herman's like, yeah, you know what I mean, he went to California, didn't he? Didn't he? I told you. Was there any benefit to that? He's like, no, I just wanted to show you. Poor Ralph. He'd been a victim of the Great Depression and was homeless at the time. Herman found him a room to live in, paid his boarding fees, and took the old man on regular fishing trips. Ralph's new landlady, Mrs. Christine Chirone, would later explain, Ralph was a nice man. He would go down and light the fire for me in the morning. He would go out and buy things for me. My children liked him too. Everybody around the house liked him. Herman signed the illiterate Ralph up for life insurance. Ralph signed the documents with an X and listed Mrs. Cerrone as his beneficiary, unwittingly implicating her in Herman's scheme. Again, like life insurance, don't you have to be like, yeah, I want to be the beneficiary? Although I guess people can leave you shit in their will, and then you're like, oh, for fuck's sake, I don't even want that. But you can renounce things in a will, right? You can be like, I don't want it. That sounds like a lot of work, and I can never sell it. The next day, a police officer found Ralph floating face down on a mudflat. He'd apparently drowned in a foot of water. In the months leading up to his death, Herman had taken out numerous life insurance policies on Ralph, listing himself as Ralph's brother, Herman Caruso, and even creating a signature for the man who couldn't even write his name. A few days before the fishing trip, Herman paid a man named Salvador Sortino $10 to push Ralph into a river and drown him. When he didn't finish the job, Herman drowned the old man himself. When Herman went to claim the $3,000 or $55,290 today in life insurance money that he'd taken out on Ralph, the insurance company had flagged Ralph's death as suspicious and had made a note of the discrepancies between the various signatures on his policies, and when Herman couldn't provide proof that he was Herman Caruso, the policies didn't pay out. Good. Because the reason insurance is so expensive is I feel like there's still a lot of insurance fraud that goes on. And that's why it's expensive. And it's like, can everyone stop doing insurance fraud so I can have lower premiums, please? Herman did better the second time around. This time, he and another accomplice took his intended victim, John Wallishin, out for a drive. He hit him over the head with a lead pipe, put the body in the middle of the road, and drove over it a few times. Jesus Christ. Passers-by found his body in the middle of the road, and the police ruled his death an accident. It's like, oh, what happens if he got run over? Well, it's an accident, but it's also a hit and run, isn't it? I mean, just because something's an that's why we have manslaughter. It's like you killed someone by accident. Jesus Christ. And also, it's like, what happened to him? Oh, I got run over. 3 times. What the police? Do your fucking job. Marie Wallishin was now a grieving widow, and once the policies paid out, she and her lover Herman split the money. Years later, Mrs. Cerrone would later be sent to prison for conspiring to murder Ralph Caruso. Good, because it sounds like she did. And then there was Joseph Arena, who Herman also kindly invited on a fishing trip before sending him to California. For this trip, it enlisted the help of Dominic Rodeo, a member of the mob-like organization called the Black Hands. They plied Is that the same Black Hand that murdered Franz Ferdinand? They plied Mr. Arena with enough alcohol to ensure that he wouldn't be able to defend himself and then drowned him. The Petrillo cousins pocketed $6,400, or nearly $118,000 today, thanks to a double indemnity clause in Joseph Arena's life insurance policy. But Paul wasn't a fan of Herman's methods and decided that there had to be a more subtle way to get rid of his clients. He started attending gatherings hosted by other faith healers and befriended a Russian Jew and grocer by the name of Morris Bulber. Before the Great Depression, Bulber had owned a grocery store, but after it closed, he moved his family to Philadelphia and started advertising his services as a faith healer. Wow, this is like a proper scam back in the day. I mean, it's a scam nowadays, but I feel like there's less faith healers because people are like, oh, please, come on now. But back in the day, people were like, yeah, okay, sounds good. This is how people will be about homeopaths and osteopaths and chiropractors and all this kind of stuff in like 100 years. People will be like, yeah, they still exist, but mostly not. Like faith healers, not so much. Allegedly. Bulber claimed to have been trained in the arcane arts by a Chinese witch and explained that he was an expert on the Kabbalah, an ancient book on superstition and witchcraft. He claims that he could cure any ills, help you get rid of the evil eye, and save your marriage with the help of his love potions. Paul told him of his financial troubles, and Bulber would provide Paul with the means of murdering Luigi Lavecchio. According to Sophia Lavecchio, she'd gone out to see Morris Bulber in July 1932 and asked him to help her cure her husband. He'd been a construction worker and had fallen off a scaffold 9 years earlier, sustaining severe internal injuries. He was now fully healed, but there were times when he would become ill and he wasn't able to work, leaving her to run their sweets shop and manage the household on her own. It's like, yeah, no, I'm fully healed, but sometimes my back acts up when I don't want to go to work. He gets sick a couple of weeks, and then when he gets up, he's all right again. It's been 9 years, all the time like that. Lay down and get up. Lay down and get up. The doctor says he's going to die soon because all his insides, they're green-like, and someday they'll burst. Doctors of the past, I see what's wrong with him. His insides are green and they're fit to burst. Bulber referred Sophie to the charming Paul Petrillo, who went to see Sophie and Luigi at their home. He told the Lavecchios that he worked with a professor from New York and that he'd see what he could do to help Luigi. But the treatments would be expensive. If the worst happened, would they be able to claim from any life insurance policies? Sophie said that she'd tried to take out life insurance policies a year earlier, but because Luigi was so sick, all of her applications had been denied. Paul reassured her and told her that, I have a man who can give you insurance with no doctor. If he dies and you ain't got no money, how are you going to pay us? Sophie agreed to take out another life insurance policy, and an insurance agent came to see her at her house. They drew up 2 $400 policies with her as the beneficiary, and then the agent drew up 2 more without Sophie's knowledge, one for him and one for Paul. Each policy was dated a month apart to avoid suspicion. Yeah, nothing like 3. How many? Two insurance. 4. Yeah, nothing like 4 insurance policies, life insurance policies, to not be suspicious. I mean, it's just like, come on, what are you doing? Once they received the approved documents in the mail, Bulber provided Paul with a glittering white powder that contained a mixture of arsenic and antimony, a toxic, silvery metalloid that has the same effect on the body as arsenic. Paul told Sophie that the powder was a strong potion that would help cure her husband. It's La Fatura. It'll take care of your husband. Don't worry. What are you having tonight? You having spaghetti? Mix it in with the spaghetti. You mix it in his coffee, in his Zappa. All the meals, you mix it in. If he needs a doctor, call Dr. Bacella. I'll write the address and leave it on the bureau. Shortly after dinner, Luigi began vomiting. During the night, he had violent diarrhea. Oh, God. I the bed, didn't he? And Sophie was up all night changing bed sheets. Oh, that's so grim. I've never shit the bed. Jesus, no matter how sick I've been. The next morning, she called Dr. Bacella and he diagnosed Luigi with gastroenteritis. He prescribed Pepto-Bismol for his stomach and a tincture for the pain, and when Luigi didn't get better, he added a mixture of chamomile and morphine. Hell yes, bro. It's like, finally, the good stuff, yes! After a week, Sophie went to see Paul herself and told him, what kind of powder did the professor from New York give you? My husband, he just throws up every day, and diarrhea too. He makes dirty all my sheets. How does he do that? Oh, he shits himself in bed constantly. Paul reassured her that the vomiting was a necessary evil and a sure sign that the medicine was working. He gave her capsules filled with arsenic and told her to keep dosing her husband. But Sophie refused. She no longer trusted Paul or his professor from New York and started feeding Luigi milk. He managed to keep it down and started getting better. When Paul didn't hear back from Sophie, he went to check on Luigi and forced 2 capsules down his throat, insisting that Luigi needed more medicine. At 10 p.m. on the 9th of August 1932, Dr. Pacello wrote Luigi Lavecchio's death certificate. Afterwards, Paul told a grieving Sophie, "Why are you crying? You know he was no good, always sick. He was no good for you, no good. Let me show you what a good man can do for you." Bruh, what are you doing? That is fucking disturbing, my dude. You murdered her husband, and now you're like, "Hey, baby." You fucking horrible person. He charmed the widow, promised to look after, and accompanied her when she went to claim the $900 payout that she'd received from the insurance companies. When the clerk handed the money over, however, Paul pocketed it, and when Sophie complained that she would go to the police and report him for theft, he threatened her and said, "Stay away from the polizia if you've got any sense. You helped do that job on your husband." Oh my lord. She's like, "What?" She's like, "What? What do you mean?" And he's like, yeah, you poisoned him with the poison that I gave you. Fucking hell, that's intense. Sophie did as she was told, and in December 1939, she would once again listen to her lawyer when he told her to plead guilty to the murder of her husband, and she would spend up to 20 years in prison. Jesus Christ. Paul, you're such a piece of shit. Christ almighty. The Witch of Pasyunk Avenue and the Kiss of Death. The case of Gilia Tefana, the angel makers of Nagarev, and the Witch of Vladimirovets all have one thing in common: pissed off wives and the witches who sold them the arsenic-laced love potions that helped them get rid of their abusive and alcoholic husbands. And now that Morris Bulber was providing the same service, it wasn't long before he managed to recruit one of these witches to their cause. Her name was Maria Favato, and she was also a faith healer like Morris Bulber. She had also buried 2 of her husbands before she joined the criminal enterprise that would later become known as Arsenic Inc., and her job was to find women who wanted to get rid of their husbands and then refer them to Paul Petrillo. With their help, Maria rid herself of her 3rd husband, Charles Ingrao, as well as her stepson, Philip. Bro, can you imagine being her 4th husband? Like, oh, you've been married 3 times before? They all died. How? Well, natural causes. Don't get married. If you're about to get married, like, dear listener, and someone's had like many previous like husbands or wives, and they've all died young, maybe just have a second look at that. Maybe be like, I wonder if I'm next. Also, you're welcome. Another widow joined their cause, and that was Rose Carina. Unlike most of the women who lived in Pasyunk Avenue, Rose wasn't an immigrant. She'd been born in Hammonton, New Jersey, got pregnant when she was 14, and married the father of her baby, the 26-year-old Antonio Carbonato, shortly after. By the time she was 18, Rose was already a mother to 3 children, and when she turned 20, Rose abandoned her family and moved to Philadelphia. She divorced her first husband, found work as a cigarette packer, and married her second husband, Dominic Carina, in 1926. Rose gave birth to a daughter, Rita, in 1928, and then had her daughter from her first marriage, the 15-year-old Grace, move in with her to help her look after Rita. Rose was a flirt who hosted drunken parties at their house while Dominic was at work and often entertained her male guests in their bedroom. Oh, hello. In 1931, Rose befriended one of their closest neighbors, Paul Petrillo, and shortly after, Dominic suddenly became ill. What a coincidence. Grace was told to take the 4-year-old Rita out to the movies, and when they got back, Dominic had passed away. The doctor would later declare that it had a heart condition that had resulted in his sudden death. Shortly after, Rose started working for Paul Petrillo as his secretary and helped him keep track of his various investments. She married her 3rd husband, Prospero Lisi, in February 1933, and he passed away just 4 months later, leaving Rose $5,000 richer. Oh my god, that's a lot of money in today's money. She then befriended a local grocer named Peter Stair and moved in with him and his family in 1934. In June 1936, he was diagnosed with a nervous lump in the throat and passed away in hospital on the 29th of June 1936. What's the cause of that lump in your throat? No, it's not cancer. It's nervousness. Okay. What should we give you for that nervousness? Cocaine and morphine. Yes! And passed away in hospital on the 29th of June 1936, shortly after it started foaming at the mouth. His death certificate listed his cause of death as diabetes. Together, Maria and Rose would agree to help nurse the husbands of women like Sophia Lavecchio and help ensure their victims met their end without any interference from their concerned wives. They also ran a dating service, setting up potential black widows with men who Paul Petrillo had already marked for death. Oh my god, this is so dark. Together, Paul Petrillo, Morris Bulber, Maria Favato, and Rose Carina would be responsible for the deaths of at least 20 people by September 1938, and yet they had mostly managed to get away with it. It wasn't until Herman Petrillo once again decided to help himself to a piece of the cake that the police finally caught up with Arsenic Inc. The Snitch. In June 1938, a police informant named George Meyer walked into the Secret Service's service branch in Philadelphia. He told the person manning the reception desk that he had some important information that might be of interest to their bosses, and when he was finally introduced to someone willing to listen to him, he started spinning a tale that had resulted in him being kicked out of the Philadelphia police station for being a nut. Meyer claimed that a local spaghetti salesman named Herman Petrillo had offered to pay him $2,500 if he'd agreed to kill an associate of his, an Italian immigrant called Fernandino Alfonsi. Meyer had to hit Alfonsi over the head with a lead pipe and then push him down a flight of stairs, making his death seem like an accident. What's more, he would be paid for his services with counterfeit money. Be like, no, real money, please. Thank you very much. The counterfeit's no good to me. It's counterfeit. Meyer's story drew the attention of the head of the service branch, William A. Landvoigt, and he'd had his eye on Herman Petrillo and his New York mob connections for years, but they'd never been able to get their hands on the evidence they needed to bring an end to his activities. Landvoigt and an investigation team sat down with Meyer, and together they drew up a plan. Meyer and an agent named Stanley B. Phillips would go back to Herman Petrillo and agree to murder Mr. Alfonsi in exchange for $500. However, they had to delay actually killing him for as long as possible, at least until Agent Phillips managed to get his hands on some counterfeit money, which he would give to the Secret Service as the evidence they needed to finally arrest Herman Petrillo. At first, everything went well. Herman Petrillo agreed to the deal and even told Meyer and Agent Phillips that he'd planned on collecting a life insurance policy he'd taken out on Mr. Alfonsi. This seems like, already, don't you have enough to lock him up? For 2 weeks, he suggested even more ways in which the men could kill Mr. Alfonsi, including drowning, hitting him over the head with a sandbag, or running him over with a car. All of these deaths would be ruled accidental, of course, invoking the double indemnity clause of the policy. This just seems like the police should be like, well, yeah, you were going to murder him. You were planning to murder him. That's going to be years in prison, isn't it? Isn't that enough? Or what are you going to do? Wait for them to actually murder him? That's not very responsible. Agent Phillips told Herman that they'd need counterfeit money to buy the car that they'd use in the accident, but Herman laughed him off and told him that he needed a car, he could just steal one. Herman also arranged multiple opportunities for the two men to take out Mr. Alfonsi, with the help of Mrs. Alfonsi, of course, who hung a white tea towel over the fence to let the men know that her husband would be home alone that night. And yet, the two men kept on coming up with excuses for why they hadn't yet managed to murder Mr. Alfonsi. A month went by, and when Meyer contacted Herman and asked him if he still wanted to kill Mr. Alfonsi, Herman told him that Mr. Alfonsi had already been dealt with. The f***er must have 9 lives because we gave him enough arsenic to kill 6 men. A concerned Meyer then went to Mr. Alfonsi's house and told his wife Stella Alfonsi that he was a contractor and needed to speak to her husband. But Mrs. Alfonsi shook her head and explained, "He is very sick. He's been sick since Friday. You can't see him." A few days later, Mr. Alfonsi was admitted to Philadelphia's National Stomach Hospital, and agents from the Secret Service wanted to see him. Just letting this poisoning go on so you could catch a bad guy. That's pretty f***ed up, police. To quote, Alfonsi lay there on the bed. There was a distinct yellow cast to his face. His eyelids were purple, his eyes bloodshot, his pupils bulging, his tongue had a coating over it, and he talked with great difficulty. When he spoke, he would attempt to gesticulate, but he didn't have the strength to continue. His hands would collapse back on his chest. It was almost impossible to understand him because of the thickness of his speech. Realizing that Ferdinando Alfonsi could die because they'd been too focused on their investigation, the Secret Service contacted the Philadelphia police, and Detective Schwartz, Franchetti, and Riccardi started investigating the attempted murder of Ferdinando Alfonsi. They had his doctors draw samples of his blood and urine to test it for arsenic, and it came back positive. They met with Mr. Alfonsi in the hospital and told him that his wife and Herman Petrillo had been conspiring to murder him. Mr. Alfonsi was understandably upset and told detectives that he'd applied for life insurance on multiple occasions, but since he was illiterate, his wife was the one who'd read the letters to him, and she claimed that their applications had been denied. The detectives then went to meet with the brokers for the insurance companies and found that Mrs. Stella Alfonsi would receive a total of $8,250 in the event of her husband's death. I don't understand how people got away with this in the past. And I know insurance fraud is still a thing, but it's like, This is so obvious. Like, holy Like, it's always the wife, it's always the husband, right? As I always say, if you're taking out a life insurance policy on someone, you better hope they don't die soon afterwards. Because one, that would be sad. And two, they'll definitely be like, did you kill him? Because of the life insurance thing. Stella Alfonsi and Herman Petrillo were both arrested on suspicion of attempted murder on the 27th of September 1938, exactly a month before Ferdinando Alfonsi passed away in the hospital from toxemia. So he did die, because the police were just too wrapped up in their investigation and catching their bad guy. That is so fucked up, the past. But the police still had no idea that they'd just stumbled across a criminal enterprise that had been murdering people since 1930. Arsenic Incorporated. Vincent McDevitt was the assistant district attorney at the time, and he was fully briefed on the case shortly before the arrest of Stella Alfonsi and Herman Petrillo. He interviewed both of them regarding the attempted murder of Mr. Alfonsi, but Stella denied everything. Herman, on the other hand, sang like a canary and gave McDevitt everything he'd need to dismantle the organization that Herman proudly referred to as Arsenic Inc. He explained how they operated and how they chose their victims, and even gave D.A. McDevitt the names of the victims that he knew of. They included the 3 men whom Rose Carina had been involved with: Dominic Carina, Prospero Lissi, and Peter Steyer. Then there was Antonio Giacobbe, Giuseppe De Martino, Antonio Romulado, John Woloshin, Romain Mandiuk, Pietro Piroli, and Salvatore Carilli. But Arsenic Inc. didn't just get rid of unwanted husbands. Jennifer Pino and Jenny Cassetti's deaths were ordered by their husbands. Lena Winkleman had been poisoned by her son-in-law, and Philip Ingrao had been killed by his stepmother Maria Favato shortly after she'd done away with his father, Charles Ingrao. Herman's testimony led to the arrest of Paul Petrillo and Maria Favato, and just like his cousin, Paul had no issues filling the holes in D.A. McDevitt's list of victims. But both of the Petrillos insisted that they had nothing to do with the murders, they were simply bystanders. The Petrillo's cousin's arrest was reported in the local newspapers, and in April 1939, arrest warrants were issued for both Morris Bulber and the Kiss of Death, Rose Carina, who'd vanished shortly before the news of Herman's arrest spread down past Shunk Avenue back in 1938. The Russian Jew Morris Bulber calmly walked into a Philadelphia police station on the 1st of May 1939 and handed himself over, reportedly realizing that with the advent of World War II, he wouldn't be welcome back in Europe. In exchange for turning state witness, Morris Bulber agreed to plead guilty to the first-degree murder of a man named Romain Mandiuk. D.A. McDevitt would later tell reporters, and I quote, "His character was one of the most amazing I ever saw. Shrewd, talented, and fascinating, but unpredictable and utterly fantastic. He spoke 14 languages. God damn, and had a remarkable memory. His position in the organization required certain amenities. He wasn't questioned in a cell or dingy room in City Hall. A suite of rooms was taken at the Bellevue Stafford Hotel. Dinner for Chief Connolly of the county detectives, Bulber, and myself was served in the room. Being a vain man, we played to his vanity. Chief Connolly appointed him deputy investigator. Proudly, he accepted the assignment, promised to help us clean up the ring, and agreed that he would tell all. He did. For 2 straight days, Bulber talked. Pacing the floor of the living room of the hotel suite, he dictated to 2 stenographers who alternated murder after murder. He gave all of the details, circumstances, and little byplays and incidents of each case. Altogether, he made 6 statements, each one 20 to 50 pages in length. This guy is singing like a canary. And I mean, yeah, you gotta be the first, right? You gotta be like, yeah, I'll do it. Yeah, I'll do it. And he's not going to prison. And he's not going back to Europe. He's like getting away with this shit. Now the police focused on finding the evidence they needed to convict the members of Arsenic Inc., and they started by exhuming the bodies of the known victims. According to D.A. McDevitt at the time, it wasn't exactly easy to prove that a murder victim had been poisoned, especially if arsenic had been used to kill them. White arsenic was a common ingredient in rat poison and other pesticides. Green arsenic, or rather copper acetorsonite, had enabled scientists in the late 1800s to create a green dye that was referred to as Paris green. It was used to dye both fabric and wallpaper and turned everyday objects into ticking time bombs. Wow, in the past we were just like, yeah, what's in that paint? Lead. What's in that wallpaper dye? Arsenic. What's in that? Radiation. Like, we're just like, everywhere we live, everything we wear, everything we're doing, it's like, yeah, let's put poisons in them. The vibrant green book covers slowly poisoned the reader. Women mysteriously died after wearing gorgeous green dresses, and when the heat emitted from gas lamps caused the dye in the wallpaper to evaporate, it made the house's occupants deathly ill. I wonder what we're using today that in the future scientists will be like, what the f*** were you up to? I think like diesel cars in cities is probably going to be one of those big things. Like, I don't know, I'm just walking along the street and a bus comes by, it's like, and you're like, breathe in those diesel particulates, Whistle. That's good for you, isn't it? Arsenic was also used to treat syphilis and was an ingredient in various beauty products that were famed for giving its users rosy cheeks. It also didn't help that arsenic occurs naturally in the soil of all 50 states in the USA, especially near coal-burning power plants and mining sites, and could leach into bodies after burial. It was too easy for the defense to argue that the presence of arsenic in the body was circumstantial and didn't prove that the deceased had been poisoned. It also didn't help that the symptoms of arsenic poisoning matched the symptoms of food poisoning, bleeding ulcers, and heart failure, especially since most of the victims' death certificates listed their deaths as being the result of gastroenteritis, heart failure, pneumonia, influenza, and diabetes. But D.A. McDevitt had done his research before building his case against the Petrillos, and he made sure to dot every I and cross every T, ensuring that they would be prepared for any arguments that the defense could throw at them. Long quote from him here. "We had a complete working unit on the case. It consisted of 20 detectives, 6 insurance company investigators, 2 chemists, 2 physicians, 1 pathologist, a toxicologist, and an undertaker, as well as a score of helpers. As each body was exhumed in the presence of 2 homicide detectives and the superintendent of the cemetery, a police photographer took a photograph. Samples of the soil or water lying in the bottom of the grave were then taken and delivered to the chemist. The casket was removed to the morgue in the presence of the detectives and received by the coroner's physician and 2 chemists." Oh my god, it's gonna smell terrible. Partly decomposed body that's been underground forever. Like, I remember watching the CSI in the past where they find a body and it was... there's one image that sticks with me where it was like, there was like a body in a suitcase or whatever. And the coroner, the old dude with the beard, he's just like going about his business. And like someone comes in and is like, "Oh, dude, what is that?" And it's like, that is soup. It's just their like decomposed body. And you're like, Christ, this is a grim job. I'm so glad that I just get to read about this stuff rather than actually seeing any of it. Respect to the people who have to deal with dead bodies. Jesus. In the presence of 2 identification witnesses who knew the deceased in his lifetime, as well as the undertaker who furnished the casket, the box was opened. People who knew him be like, yeah. I mean, that's sort of him. He's a little bit saggy and soupy, but yeah, it's him. The coroner's physician then received samples of clothing worn by the deceased and the lining of the casket. Bits of metal were removed. These were given to the chemist to be tested for arsenic, along with samples of the soil and bits of wallpaper taken from the room where the deceased had died. Then the physician donned rubber operating gloves known to be chemically cleaned by him, and using sterilized instruments, removed an organ one at a time, weighing it in the presence of the chemist and then placing it in a chemically clean, hermetically sealed glass jar. This jar was held by the chemist who was to make the test. By this procedure, we were prepared for medical and chemical experts for the defense, for we knew and could prove, if necessary, that everything the victim's body touched from the time of death to its exhumation was tested and found negative for arsenic. This is some proper science going on for the past. I'm quite impressed past in this case. As the list of victims grew, the suspect list also grew longer and longer, but it would be up to the courts to decide whether everyone who could be linked to Arsenic Inc. was indeed guilty, or just another victim of the Petrillo brothers' greed. The attempted murder of Mr. Storaci. Shortly after the arrest of Herman Petrillo and Stella Alfonsi, D.A. McDevitt received news from Sing Sing Prison in New York that a convicted criminal named Johnny Cacapardo had some information on the Petrillo brothers. Johnny claimed that back in 1936 he'd lived in Brooklyn when he started seeing a 29-year-old woman named Molly Storaci. But Molly's mother and stepfather didn't approve of their relationship since Johnny was already married with 2 children. No wonder why they didn't approve of that relationship. Johnny told his uncle, Paul Petrillo, about their predicament, and when the 2 lovers went to visit the Petrillos in Philadelphia, Paul started asking Molly about her parents. Molly explained that her stepfather was a wealthy contractor, but that he was too strict with her. He also never had time for his family since he spent a lot of time at work, and when he wasn't working, he preferred to socialize with his friends. What a dick. It's just like Abs and Dad, isn't it? Like, I work all day. I don't work that much. And I come home, I spend time with my family, and it's like, it's very rewarding, but it's also like, would I rather be at the pub with my friends? Yeah, often, I'll say it, like, I love my kids, but they're also annoying. And it's like, yeah, but you know what I don't do? Go to the pub with my mates, because it's good to be dad. And it's also good for your friend, your not your friends, your like family growing up and your kids and stuff. It's good for them. They like spending time with you, even if they can be a little bit annoying. Especially, oh my God, my son is like, he's 2 years old now. He's just turned 2. And he's in this, like, they call it the terrible twos. It's a nightmare. Oh my God. He just wait. Like, my wife mostly sleeps with him, and I look after our older kid in the night if she needs something. But it's like, he gets up so early, he runs around the house, and he's screaming, and he's crazy, and if he doesn't get his way, he'll just cry and tantrum, and you're like, stop! And then I'm like, that's me inside. Outside, I'm like, oh, that's nice. Like, you know that meme with the super angry guy with that like smiling mask over his face? And it's like, that's me when my kids are misbehaving. Just like behind the scenes. In front. Oh, God. What are we talking about? Oh, yes, murder. Paul told Molly that a friend of his was a powerful mystic and that he had the power to solve all of her family's problems. Molly didn't bite, though, and after Johnny and Molly returned to New York, Paul wrote her a letter. In reference to your stepfather, I see that his intentions towards you because you did not pay any attention to him, and he turned bad now. The only way to quiet him is to send him to California. Johnny understands what I mean and could do it in 24 hours or a week, any way you want it, but it will cost your mother $500. Let me know if he has any insurance on his life. If not, take all you can get. And when the time comes, I will take care of it. Bro, you writing down your crimes. It's like, oh yeah, he's being like, oh, I'm being real subtle about this. Yeah, I'll send him to California any day, 24 hours. Yeah, $500. Yeah, life insurance policies. Dude, you're not being subtle enough, bro. You need to be way more subtle than this if you're going to write down your potential crimes. If you are going to write down your crimes, be subtle about it. Johnny and Molly eventually moved to Philadelphia, and Paul told the members of Arsenic Inc. that Johnny was going to join their operation. Rose confided in Johnny and told him how they'd killed 3 of her husbands so far, and that they were planning on getting rid of Paul's wife as well, so that the 2 of them could get married. Johnny and Molly weren't idiots, and they didn't want to become a part of Arsenic Inc. Molly got scared and returned to Brooklyn, but Paul and Rose had already set their targets on her stepfather, whose life insurance policy was worth $25,000. Jesus Christ. And they weren't willing to let him get away, so Rose sent a letter to Mr. Storace and told her, "Tell your daughter Molly not to come back to Philadelphia. Johnny wants to kill her. I'm coming to New York on Sunday with Paul. We will tell you everything." Shortly after they'd left, Johnny heard that his uncle and Rose had left town. On a hunch, he went to check his uncle's drawer and saw that the life insurance policy they'd taken out on Mr. Storace wasn't in his uncle's desk drawer anymore. Realizing what they were up to, Johnny grabbed a gun and caught the first bus to Brooklyn, intent on warning Mr. Storace and that Paul Petrillo planned to murder him. When he arrived at the Storace household, Paul and Rose were having tea with Mrs. Storace, and Paul was telling her that he could give her a magic powder that would solve all of her problems. "They call me John Doe, the magician. I'm a great spiritualist. I'm a crystal gazer. I perform all kinds of magic. This is magic powder. It is ground up from the bones of dead people. When we want something to happen to someone, we light up a glass of alcohol, and we use a little bit of that powder. If we want to get someone out of the way, they're gone like that. When anybody dies that quickly, we have our own doctors and our own undertakers. Our doctor passes them with heart failure, and then there's nothing left for the undertaker to do but bury them." Oh my lord. It's just like, yeah. How do you get away with this for so long when you're just like so brazenly being like, yeah, no, we murder people for money. Yeah, I know, right? Crazy. Johnny confronted his uncle and asked to speak to Molly, who convinced her mother that Johnny wouldn't hurt her. Johnny, Molly, and Paul Petrillo went to one of the bedrooms to talk, and when Molly saw that Johnny had a gun, she warned Paul, who tried to take it away from his nephew. In the ensuing struggle, 2 shots went off and hit Molly in the stomach and her upper arm. Johnny escaped by jumping through a window, and a panicked Mrs. Storace called the police. Molly was rushed to the hospital, and Paul was taken into police custody because he was a material witness. Meanwhile, Rose tried her best to find the letter that Paul had written to Molly, but Mr. Storace had already found it and handed it over to the police. When they questioned him over the letter, he claimed innocence and suggested that Johnny was the one who'd written the letter. As proof, he was able to show the police that his handwriting didn't match the writing in the letter. In a stroke of luck, he had one of his accomplices write it since their English skills were better than his own. Molly passed away a week after the shooting took place, and when Johnny heard the news, he turned himself in. He told the New York police everything he'd learned about Arsenic Inc. during his stay in Philadelphia and offered to become a police informant in order to take them down. Unfortunately, the New York police thought that he'd made everything up and arrested him on the murder of Molly Storace. He was found guilty and was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Police be like, nah, that's too crazy. But now that the Philadelphia police had started investigating Arsenic Inc., Johnny seized the opportunity to prove his innocence, and he turned state witness against the Petrillos in order to hope that his own conviction would finally be overturned. Okay, cool. Smart move. The murder trials of Herman and Paul Petrillo. Between September 1938 and December 1945, 45 people were arrested in connection with the activities of Arsenic Inc. The state prosecutor's office was only able to build cases against 29 of them, but it meant 29 separate murder trials had to be held, most of which took place between March 1939 and May 1941. I don't like when the operation gets this big. Surely there's just such a big chance that someone's going to turn on the operation, because the more people you involve, the more likely someone's going to be like, wait, I can get away with this if I just grass on everybody. And then I'm going to have to change my face and move to like Guatemala or something. But I'd be free and rich. Herman Petrillo's trial took place on the 13th of March 1939 in Philadelphia's Court of Quarter Sessions in City Hall. He was represented by Milton Leidner, and the case was heard by Judge Harry McDevitt, who wasn't related to D.A. McDevitt. According to the Philadelphia Record, Judge McDevitt was known as Hanging Harry. Uh-oh. If your judge is colloquially called Hanging Harry, you're like, oh, fuck! Got the wrong judge. Petition for a change of judge. I don't want the hanging one. I want, like, lots of forgiveness, Harry. That's the judge I want. Because he liked to take the prosecution side and was a champion of the death sentence. Not exactly a good thing if you're at the center of a widely reported criminal organization that has been preying on the poor at the height of the Great Depression. You go into those gallows, boy. Herman's lawyer, Milton Leidner, allegedly left his client to loudly object to the claims made by the various witnesses brought forward by the prosecution, while Leidner just sat and listened and barely made any objections of his own. 4 different insurance agents from 4 different insurance companies came forward to explain how Herman Petrillo had introduced them to Ferdinando Alfonsi and then had them drop life insurance policies with a combined value of $3,200. George Meyer and Agent Phillips of the Secret Service explained their role in the plot to murder Mr. Alfonsi and even showed the court the black sandbag that Herman had suggested they used to kill him. The judge be like, wait, he's dead. Why didn't you guys do anything? You're going on trial next, guys. A pharmacist named Benjamin Winokur also took the stand and explained that in 1936 there was a shortage of arsenic in the city, and Herman had visited his store where he tried to buy poison hemlock and hydrocyanic acid. When Winokur refused to sell it to him, Herman asked him and Dr. Henry Alonzo if they could sell him live typhoid germs instead. It's like, no, we can't sell you poison, but I will sell you a bioweapon. Detective Michael D. Schwartz of the Philadelphia Homicide Bureau explained how they'd found 2 industrial catalogs in Herman's flat, which listed the prices for various chemicals. Please don't tell me. He's just gone through it with a highlighter and been like, arsenic, cyanide, hemlock, typhoid, just highlighting all the things he wants. Herman had noted the prices of acid arsenic and arsenic trioxide or white arsenic by making check marks next to their listings in the catalogs. Bro, are you actually shitting me? Then Dr. Henry E. D'Alonzo explained that Stella Alfonsi had summoned him to her house on the evening of the 29th of August 1938, and that he'd started treating Fernandino Alfonsi. He had Mr. Alfonsi admitted to the stomach hospital a week later and suspected that he'd been poisoned. Blood and urine tests confirmed his suspicions, but Mr. Alfonsi was already too far gone for their treatment to do any good. His spleen was swollen, his joints ached, and he was in a lot of pain. To quote, "He was a most cooperative patient. Poor fellow tried so hard to get well, but as the condition of his bones and limbs became more severe, he had to have morphine in rather increasing doses until he died." Final outcome, in my opinion, was caused by paralysis of the muscles of respiration induced by profound toxemia. Then the prosecution told the jury about Herman's alleged involvement in the accidental deaths of Ralph Caruso, John Woloshin, and Joseph Arena, as well as the murders of Charles and Philip Ingrao, despite having absolutely no evidence that Herman had been involved. When Leidner finally spoke up and objected, Judge McDevitt ruled against them, allowing the prosecution's theory of Herman's involvement in their deaths to be admitted to the court record. Herman's defense was laughable. When it came his turn to take the stand and D.A. McDevitt confronted him with various witness statements made against him, Herman insisted that the witnesses were lying. When he was presented with documentary evidence and was asked to read it aloud in court, he claimed that he couldn't read despite the fact that he'd written many of the documents that he was presented with. His lawyer made no effort to defend him, and it didn't take long for the judge to decide that Herman Petrillo was guilty of first-degree murder of Fernandino Alfonsi and guilty of second-degree murder for the murder of Ralph Caruso, the homeless man that had drowned. Seems like pretty first-degree murder to me, but whatever, Judgy, as long as you give him the noose, we're all good. Herman stood up and yelled at the forewoman of the jury, calling her a lousy bitch, before he lunged at her and tried to attack her. Judge McDevitt sentenced Herman to death, and before he was led away, his lawyer Milton Leidner stood up and apologized to the court, explaining that, "I wouldn't have defended this man if I had known he was such scum." Bro, You're the defense lawyer. That is what you do. And I'm sorry, but everyone deserves a defense, and you're incompetent. And this should definitely be grounds for like a mistrial or whatever, so he can get a competent lawyer. Like, do I think he should be hanged? Yes! Do I think he deserves a fair trial? Also, yes. Paul's trial began on September the 11th, 1939. His lawyer was the Bulldog Major Lemuel B. Schofield, a World War I veteran and ex-police commissioner, and the case was heard by Judge Albert S.C. Miller. Sounds like this judge, whose name is the Bulldog, is going to be much more competent than old, like, I don't care about him, I'm not going to do my job, Milton, or whatever he was. The case against Paul wasn't much different than Herman's, but the Major didn't let the prosecution get away with the same stunts they'd pulled during Herman Petrillo's trial. Where Milton Leidner had been a passive participant, Major Schofield objected to every single piece of evidence that was presented to the court. When the insurance agents explained that Paul let them create life insurance policies for his victims, Major Schofield pointed out that the agents had failed to follow the company procedure by taking Paul at his word. They accepted X's instead of signatures, co-signed policies without meeting the insured persons, and listed Paul Petrillo as a beneficiary on numerous life insurance policies. He claimed that the evidence of potential arsenic poisoning provided by medical professionals was purely circumstantial because none of them listed toxemia as the cause of death. When Sophie Levecchio stood up in court, she explained how Paul had provided her with the poison that had killed her husband and then lay claim to the money that she had received from the insurance companies before threatening to kill her if she went to the police. Major Schofield called her testimony into question by pointing out that Sophie was also a murder suspect and theorized that Paul was her accomplice during the murder of her husband Luigi. And when the expert stood up and explained how they'd found traces of arsenic in the majority of the bodies they'd exhumed, Major Schofield had them explain their process in detail, but because D.A. McDevitt and his team had been exceptionally thorough, the Major was unable to claim that any of the physical evidence presented to the court was purely circumstantial. Then it was Morris Bulber's turn to take the stand. He'd still been on the run when Herman was tried, but during Paul's murder trial, he told the jury he was the brains of the investigation bureau and then explained in detail how Arsenic Inc. operated. Once again, Major Schofield objected to several of Bulber's claims, but Bulber was having none of it. After Major Schofield asked Bulber to repeat himself because he was finding it difficult to follow, Bulber burst out, "What do you mean you didn't get it? You have cotton in your ears?" At the same time, newspapers reported on Major Schofield's admirable attempts at defending his client, but 14 days into his murder trial, Paul Petrillo stood up in court and declared that he was guilty of all the charges that had been made against him. Your lawyer be like, "Bro, what the fuck, bro? Why did I do all this work?" And you're just like, nah, actually, change my mind. Guilty, judge, guilty, I'm guilty. What are you doing? George Cooper, the author of the book Poison Widows, theorizes that it was because news had reached him that other members of Arsenic Inc. were dropping like flies, and some of them were turning against him in the hope that they'd receive lesser sentences. Just like Herman, Paul Petrillo was sentenced to death, but unlike his cousin, Paul kept quiet when he was led back to his cell. The Trials of the Poison Widows. The 15 women who were accused of murdering their husbands became known as the Poison Widows, and D.A. McDevitt would later explain that it was almost impossible to separate the accomplices from the victims. Both the Petrillos and Morris Bulber had implicated Maria Favato and Rose Carina, and the evidence provided by George Meyer and the Secret Service indicated that Stella Alfonsi had been an active participant in plotting the murder of Ferdinando Alfonsi. But the evidence against the other windows was mostly circumstantial. Like Christine Serrano and Sophie Levecchio, most of them were found guilty on the sole basis that they'd signed up for life insurance policies shortly before their husbands died, and the others were told that it would be in their best interests if they just pled guilty, despite insisting that they hadn't poisoned their husbands. According to George Cooper, the main reasons for this were that they didn't have competent lawyers. They were Italian immigrants who could barely speak or understand English, and they were mostly middle-aged, overweight and unattractive housewives who'd failed to gain the jury's sympathy. In summary, none of them received fair trials, but you don't have to take my word for it, since Liam Bird, other writer Liam, was more than happy to rant on about the ridiculousness of it all. Liam's Legal Corner, aka The Liar, the Witch, and the Moron. Liam, another writer for this channel, makes an appearance. Hello. To anyone unfamiliar with me, my name is Liam. I am not only a writer, but also a lawyer. In the final stages of completing my PhD, which is entirely focused on demonstrating not only why juries are ineffective, but just a plainly ridiculous institution. So grab your spam and tea, get comfortable, and let's embark on an adventure of stupidity on par with some of the most ridiculous cases I've ever read. First, I want to start with a challenge to all of you. I want you to pretend you're from 1930s Pennsylvania. It's quite hard to do. I don't know anything about 1930s Pennsylvania and have been summoned up for jury duty, or much about jury duty, to be honest, never done that. You're forced to drop whatever job or adventure you were on and report to court to pass judgment on our unlucky stars of today's story. You're sworn in on either a holy book of your choosing or the general principles of justice as allegedly enshrined in the US Constitution and led to the jury box where you could spend the next couple of months of your life. You have one task: to assess jury duty would be if someone was like, bro, you got to serve on a jury for 2 months. I'd be like, that's going to be disruptive. I run a business where we make a lot of content and stuff. And people are like, yeah, bro, everyone's got jobs. You got to go to jury duty and we'll pay you like in lunch. And it's like, bro, this is insane. But fortunately, I can't be called for jury duty because I'm smart. Not smart. I managed to get out of it because if you're not registered to vote, you're not on the jury thing. So I'm not registered to vote. Just voting. No, it's like I live abroad where I'm not a citizen. Like I'm not a citizen. I'm like a permanent resident. So I can live here. I can't vote and it can be revoked. I think that's the big differences. Like I can live here forever in Czech, in Prague, where I live, but I can't vote and they can kick me out. Whereas if you have a passport, you can vote and it's irrevocable. So they can't take your passport away from you. And I don't have that. But I do, obviously, have a British passport. But I'm not registered to vote in the UK, so I can't be called for jury duty. And people were like, Simon, why don't you vote? It's like, I don't live in the UK and I can't vote here, so that's why. You have one task: to assess whether the prosecution has proven their case beyond all reasonable doubt. This means that you must begin from the starting point that the defendant is 110% completely innocent, and then you listen to the prosecution make their case. Afterwards, if there is even a single doubt within your mind that the person hasn't committed the crime that they're accused of, you must find the defendant not guilty. This is also supposed to mean that if you feel like for any reason you cannot meet that standard, you must immediately report yourself to the judge and will be promptly removed from the jury pool. So, now you've taken a minute to think about how it might feel to be on a jury, I present to you, the accused, our jury. Based on what Emma's already told you and what I'm going to tell you now, do you think they kept true to those oaths, or maybe they were telling porkies? I don't know. Like, I'm not sure what the not cut and dry thing is here. I'm not going to be looking at the trials of the Petrillos or the clear-cut accomplices such as those of Maria Favato or Rose Carina, but instead I'm looking at the cases that it seems the media at the time were focused on the most. The trials of the poison widows. Okay, I see. So it's like, yeah, the other stuff's cut and dry. It'd be like, yo, if you're a jury and the dude just stands up in the middle of his lawyer defending you and be like, nah, bro, I did it all. Guilty as sin, brother. Then you just be like, cool, guilty, jury. Like, no doubt, he admitted it. He literally stood up in court and his lawyer was calling him insane. There was shouting, guilty. But these other poison widows? Let's see. These were the women, often wives of the dead men, who had either through maliciousness, stupidity, or innocence, sprinkled arsenic shavings and other fun sweeteners into the drinks of their husbands. Now, rather unsurprisingly, if you sprinkle poison into the drink of another person and that person later dies, you're going to be found guilty of their murder, right? Well, no. Not really, because if someone was like, oh yeah, it's sweetener, and then you're like, oh yeah, cool, thanks, and you mix it in, you're obviously not guilty of murder because you had no idea what you're doing. You don't have the mens rea. You don't have the mental element of the crime. You see, if an individual sprinkled that poison into their drink and didn't know it was poison, they certainly couldn't be found guilty of murder, since it requires the intent to kill to be shown as a component of guilt. Does it require... Isn't, at least in British law, isn't it also the intent to kill or commit grievous bodily harm, so severely injure? Then you can also, which I always found super interesting, it's like if you get into a fight and your intent is to severely injure someone, like as you might be in a fight, then you can also be guilty of murder because you had that mens rea of GBH, which I always found like really interesting. Because it's like, I didn't intend to kill them, I just wanted to really fuck them up. And you're like, well, yeah, sorry, mate. Murder for you. So that leaves our theoretical discussion open to the possibility of manslaughter by gross negligence, which arises when you have a duty to act but fail to act, and that failure causes somebody's death. So if a wife has been duped into placing poison into her husband's drink, the question would arise as to whether she knew or ought to have known that the substance that she placed in the drink was somehow poisonous. If we have reason to believe that she did, then the duty was breached if she failed to stop her husband from drinking said substance or otherwise failed to seek medical attention for her husband. Okay, so it's basically around whether she didn't know, but she should have known. So when you put these wives on trial, you, as the jury, have two questions to consider. Can you be certain, beyond a reasonable doubt, that the wife in question was aware that she was placing poison in the drink she was giving to her husband? And secondly, if you cannot be certain of the first question, can you be certain that she knew, or reasonably ought to have known, that the drink she provided her husband with was going to put him in danger of reasonable harm? If you answer no to both questions, then under the juror's oath, you must find the defendant not guilty. So, with that test in mind, let's cover some of the more egregious cases that Emma showed me. Our first case is that of Josephine Romualdo, or as she was referred to by the not at all cockroachy and utterly disgusting media, the slow wife. Wait, is that just because she's like mentally... Jesus Christ, media. You'd get so fucking cancelled today. From her arraignment, where a defendant is brought before the court to enter a plea, she was always slow to answer questions and provided answers which simply didn't seem to be intelligent or intelligible, and she came across as being incredibly and tragically naive, mostly due to her broken English and the superstitions embedded in her belief system. When the prosecutors posed Mrs. Romualdo a question as to the nature of the drink that she gave her husband, her only response was to claim that it was not a poison, but instead a so-called love drink. Romualdo would tell the jury that she had loved her husband and only hoped that by providing him with the love potion, he would love her as he did the day they were married. I mean, I feel like the bar to clear is quite low. It's quite easy to get a defense for this, right? Being like, no, I have no idea. Like, you've got to prove beyond all reasonable doubt that I thought that maybe it would hurt him. It's like, good luck with that one. I get the feeling, though, that the jury's going to be like, yeah, guilty. Even though they really shouldn't because of that oath thing. In response, the prosecution questioned the deluge of life insurance policies that Mrs. Romualdo had taken out on her husband, questions that only caused Mrs. Romualdo to cry or provide them with unsubstantial answers. The only other relevant fact exposed at trial was that in one of the meetings that Mrs. Romualdo had with Morris Bulber, she had explained that she wanted such a love potion in the hopes that her husband would stop hitting her. Beyond that, the only evidence you have to judge her on is the testimony of the Petrillos and Maria Favato, who hope to have their own sentences reduced by working with the prosecution. Look, if I'm sitting in that jury room, I'm like, no chance. Like, yeah, maybe, but that is nowhere close to no reasonable doubt. So, would you say that Mrs. Romualdo is guilty of first-degree murder or gross negligence manslaughter? Neither. Definitely not murder, and probably not gross negligence manslaughter either. Remember, if you find her guilty of first-degree murder, you also get to decide whether she should face the death penalty. Now, before I reveal the answer, let's talk about one of the other widows, Grace Paroli. Paroli was a deeply superstitious woman, and that led her to approach a fortune teller named Josephine Sedita, who was another member of Arsenic Inc. During one of those fortune-telling sessions, Paroli mentioned that her husband had serious heart problems, and as a result, they had a small life insurance policy if anything were to happen to him. Ever being the caring fraudster, Sedita offered to help make Mrs. Paroli's husband better in exchange for the life insurance policy that they'd taken out on Mr. Paroli. Such a generous soul. A few days later, Sedita gave Mr. Paroli something to drink, and he became deathly ill. This is one of those cases where it's like, either she's stupid or guilty. And if I was the defense lawyer, I'd be like, no, she's stupid. Look at her. Look how stupid she is. Look how tiny her brain is. And if I was the defender, I'd be like, look how small my brain is. And they'd be like, not guilty. Look how dumb. Look how dumb. But I think she's not guilty. I think she's just a bit dim. Or like super superstitious. And I always say, like, what's the difference? And it's just like, if you're superstitious, like a part of your brain just doesn't work right, it doesn't mean you're stupid. There are plenty of smart people who are superstitious for whatever reason. Because the part of their brain is broken, like I just said. And look, a part of my brain is broken. I have OCD. And it is unpleasant. And I do things which make no sense whatsoever. And I'm not dumb. I'm not stupid. It's not like I'm checking that thing a dozen times because, oh, maybe it'll be broken this time. Or maybe this is a problem this time. It never is. And it's just like a little part of my brain is broken. Just like superstitious people. It's not because you're dumb. It's just that there's something a little bit wrong with you. And that's okay. I don't know if I've mentioned that before. I mentioned that I have this OCD thing. It's quite unpleasant. So there's that. A few days later, Sedita gave Mr. Powell something to drink and he became deathly ill. Rose Carina and Sedita took charge of caring for him despite Mr. Paroli's protests. She could only stand by and watch as they killed her husband. So what is the evidence that you have to judge as a jury? Well, not much. Unlike most of the widows, Mrs. Paroli didn't take out new life insurance policies in the run-up to her husband's death. She had always insisted that she'd had nothing to do with his death. She never admitted to giving the powder to her husband and instead claimed that Sedita had come to her house on the promise of practicing witchcraft to heal her husband. According to Mrs. Paroli, Sedita and Karina had spent her husband's final days with him, always ensuring he took the medicine that was supposed to have saved him. At one point in her testimony, Mrs. Paroli broke down in tears and told the court you could hear him scream from 9th Street to 10th Street. The prosecution quizzed Mrs. Paroli on what she'd done with the life insurance payout of $1,500 that she'd received after her husband's death. In response, Mrs. Paroli revealed that she'd spent $1,200 alone on giving her husband the funeral he deserved, and when she ran into financial issues, Sedita refused to return the $400 life insurance policy that had been given in exchange for the curing of her husband. A fight broke out, and Mrs. Paroli told Sedita that she'd been supposed to cure Mr. Paroli, not kill him, and that she wanted her money back. In response, Sedita shrugged and said that she was keeping the policy as payment for treating Mr. Paroli. A detective from Paroli's first arrest reported that she had told him that Sedita and Karina had killed her husband, although no other officers were present, nor were such statements reported in the journal of the officer, nor were any follow-up questions given by the officer, so this testimony was given in court off the memory of the officer alone. The defense presented the independent testimony of a boarder who lived on the floor below the Parolis, who told the court and the police that he often saw Sedita and Karina make their way up to where the Parolis lived, and that he'd often seen Mrs. Paroli leave the flat after Sedita and Karina had arrived, thus leaving them alone with her husband. So I ask you again, a jury of the internet, do you find Grace Paroli to be a cold-blooded murderer, an unfortunate guilty killer, or an innocent victim preyed upon by scam artists and murderers? And again, I ask, if you find her as the first, do you sentence her to die? Vote now. I don't have to decide on whether she is a cold-blooded murderer, an unfortunate or guilty killer, or an innocent victim. I just have to decide, is there enough reasonable doubt there? And the answer is abso-fucking-lutely. There is so much reasonable doubt. It's like, maybe she killed them. Yeah, maybe. But I am so far from sure. And the idea that someone could be certain is pretty outrageous. So let's see where this goes. But do I think they're guilty? I don't actually. No. Well, if you decide not only guilty of first-degree murder, but deserving to be fried in the electric chair till crispy as bacon, then you got it right. That is insane. And I knew this was coming, but it's insane. That's right, after hearing all that lack of evidence, the jury still found both of these women guilty of the intentional killing of their husbands and then had the gall to sentence them to die. So now, as we turn to the question Emma had brought me here to ask, why? Why did juries of 23 of these women's peers sentence them to die? Well, to start, the maths enthusiasts among you may have already noted a problem. You see, a jury in a criminal trial in almost every US state and here in England and Wales has 12 members, and 12 times 2 is not 23, it's 24. So how could there only have been 23 of their peers who sat in the trial? Is it possible that one jury had gone through an entire trial, one person short, and nobody noticed? No, that would be ridiculous, since the true answer is that the foreman on both of the juries had been vehemently in support of the death penalty and pro-prosecution, and had been the same person. Are you having a laugh? This is a total miscarriage of justice. This is outrageous. You got to appeal that shit. Surely this gets appealed and there's no way that they end up being killed. No way. If they end up killed, I mean, the past was the worst, but this is pretty egregious even for the past. Yes, 73-year-old ironworker James McGee not only had worked his way onto the jury for each trial, but managed to convince both juries to elect him as foreman. He managed to sway each jury into deciding that the women were guilty and had them vote for the death penalty verdict. He even provided several interviews to the assembled media after the trials were done and almost gloated about how successful he had been. So, let's think for a minute about just how many basic principles of a fair trial that completely f***s. If you ever have sat on a jury, you'll know that one of, if not the very first question the jury will generally ask you is if there is any reason that you would not be able to try this case impartially. Meaning, is there some prior knowledge or association that you have with any of the people involved in the case, which means that you wouldn't be able to approach the question of guilt from a completely blank slate. Well, I may not be a judge, and am indeed only a humble lawyer, but I would definitely suggest to the judge in the Paroli trial that having sat through an entire trial dealing with virtually identical facts which involved the same organized crime syndicate, that it would be pretty damn prejudicial. In fact, I can tell you beyond any doubt that if this were to happen in any case today in either England, Wales, or the United States, it would lead to almost a certainly successful appeal. Yes, exactly. But you might say, Liam, McGee is only a single man. There are 11 other people on those juries who should be capable of forming their own opinions, to which I would say, well, yes, in theory, that is what is supposed to happen, since it is the entire point of having 12 jurors, but we know that that isn't the case. Firstly, we know from the up-to-date studies in this area of academia, which includes my yet-to-be-published PhD, if you pardon the humble brag, they've demonstrated beyond all reasonable doubt that if you have a jury of 12 people, and one person on that jury is either a particularly persuasive speaker or otherwise a hard ass, then more often than not, the other 11 jurors will agree with that problematic juror simply to shut them up. Yeah, like, I don't know, I feel, I don't know how to say this without being like a bit of a, without it seeming like a brag, but I'm a pretty persuasive person. Like, I reckon if I was sitting on a jury, there's a good chance that I'm going to persuade a lot of people to vote my way if I really wanted to, just because it's, I don't know, it's something I can do. And it's like, yeah, of course. And I know there are people out there that are way better at this than me, and I'm reasonable at it. So if one of those people is on a jury, they're just going to be able to do that, aren't they? Clearly. Not only do we know this from studies, but we also know it from several interviews given not only by McGee, but the various other jurors who sat in on those two trials, with several of them explicitly mentioning McGee had been the one to push them to either the death penalty or guilt to begin with. Now, again, I might hear you say, but Liam, surely it doesn't matter if only 1 or 2 people change their opinion. 2 votes not guilty and 10 votes guilty is still a guilty verdict, right? But you'd be wrong. You see, under the laws these cases were heard in, we always required a jury's verdict to be unanimous. If even a single juror disagrees, then the only verdict which may be returned is one of not guilty, and in rare cases, a retrial can be held. There is a criterion under which a jury in some jurisdictions may be allowed to return a majority verdict instead, but even in jurisdictions where this is allowed, it is heavily dissuaded that it should be done in murder trials and is never allowed in death penalty cases such as these were. So, now we've covered how we know this happens and why there is such a monumental cock-up, we've still got to cover how at the time nobody realised that it shouldn't be happening. Well, in answer to that, there are 2 more downright depressing parts of jury law that you must know. You see, a jury system is a system based on blind faith. In every single US state and in England and Wales, only the 12 jurors are allowed within the deliberation room while deliberations are being made. The only exception generally is for bailiffs and security guards who've been appointed for the sole purpose of moving the jury or bringing them food, and even then the jury is ordered not to deliberate at all in front of anybody who is not a juror. The idea is that it allows the jury total freedom in deliberation away from the restraints of being judged by the general public or court staff. It is an idea that has good intentions, but terrible results. For example, in the past, juries have used a Ouija board in an attempt to ask the victim of a murder who murdered them. They've discussed how good-looking they think the defendant is, and then argued that nobody good-looking can be a criminal. And have played Sudoku and decided to take a nap rather than engage in judgment. Not to mention the far darker scenarios where juries have judged a defendant due to their race, made grossly offensive jokes about the victims of a crime, for some reason find O.J. Simpson not guilty, I'm not dropping that one, or laughed at the emotional testimony of the victims of the crime, such as has happened in the trial of the Sandy Hook shooter. Jesus, really? These are all things juries have been caught out on, and my only question is this. If we place so much trust in our jury system, why do we allow them to have so very little oversight once they enter the deliberation room? If this is what we've caught them being up to, imagine what else they've gotten away with. Yeah, crazy shit. So I ask you, for a minute, to not only consider what the other 11 jurors could have been up to in the above 2 cases, but also what the other jurors involved in the other 11 trials of widows under similar and sometimes identical circumstances have been up to. We know a lot about these 2 in particular, as one juror was a lot more talkative than the rest, but we have no idea whether any of the other juries misbehaved. Plus, as a reminder, this is criminal law, the area of the law where we ask for the highest standards, the area of law where we impose the harshest and most severe punishments. Some of the death penalties handed down in these cases were later commuted, but that doesn't matter since the juries in these cases determines that these 2 women, who I say were more likely than not innocent, should be killed. That's not something a healthy legal system should ever allow for. Of course, the odd case will happen when the rules themselves are so poorly designed as to allow for such a miscarriage of justice to happen. At the end of the day, what I'm saying is that the jury is an unsafe metric for judging guilt, and that the trials of the poisoned widows highlight this more than any other I have come across in recent memory. At the time, the majority of people in Philadelphia would have found the wives guilty for the sole fact that they were Italian immigrants. Every member of the jury had read extensively about the case in newspapers beforehand, and we know from one juror's testimony that the other members practically forced themselves to find the defendants guilty of murder. So, After all that, I ask you again, firstly, do you think the wives were guilty? No. Secondly, do you think the juries were right to sentence them to death? No. Note that the answer to those first two questions can be different. You can believe someone did something, but that the prosecution never proved the case sufficiently. Third, as an aside, how do you feel about these juries now? I feel like they're a bit racist and not thoughtful and easily manipulated, and the foreman's a dickhead. So that's how I feel. The witch trials. When it comes to the trials of the three women who were, in my opinion, definitely guilty, none of them turned out the way you'd expect. Wait, Emma's back. Wait, do you really think they're definitely guilty? Ooh. Or is that sarcasm? Maria is hard with text. It's in all caps, like definitely guilty. So that's either a statement of firm fact, or I'm supposed to read it like definitely guilty, like sarcastically. Maria Favato was the first one to stand trial. She was accused of murdering Giuseppe Di Martino, Charles Ingrao and his son Philip, and was implicated in the murder of Antonio Romualdo. Oh, I'm sorry. These are the people the women who organized the whole thing, not the wives. My bad. Yeah, they are definitely guilty. That's much more clear now. They are bad. They are terrible people. She didn't show any emotion during a murder trial, and according to the Inquirer, an occasional flutter of the eyelids was the only movement noted in her immobile face. But on the fourth day of her trial, Maria Favato unexpectedly stood up in the middle of the proceedings, faced the judge, and declared, "I am guilty. I killed them." She was sentenced to life in prison and assisted D.A. McDevitt in compiling the cases against the other poison widows. Holy shit, these people's lawyers must be like, again? Like what? But sit down. Stop admitting you're guilty in court. Christ. Like what the f***? Stella Alfonsi's trial was due to start on the 23rd of October 1939, but 10 days after the start of her trial, she petitioned the court to have a new lawyer appointed to handle her case. By then, 5 of the widows had already been found guilty of first-degree murder, and she wasn't happy with her chances since her lawyer also represented the slow wife, Josephine Romualdo. The judge who had been appointed to hear her case, Judge Eugene Alessandroni, was the son of Italian immigrants, and he was sympathetic to her cause. So he called on a well-known and well-respected defense lawyer named Raymond Pace Alexander and asked him if he'd be willing to represent her during the murder trial. Now, Mr. Alexander had already made a name for himself as a champion of lost causes, specifically cases where the defendant was African American. That is because Mr. Alexander was also African American, and at the time, blacks weren't allowed to represent white clients. Oh, the past, everybody. So when he accepted the appointment, Raymond Pace Alexander became the first lawyer of African American descent to represent a white client. Wow. Stella Alfonsi, though, wasn't like any of the other poison widows. She was 29, beautiful, understood that optics would play a major role in her case, and did her best to play on the jury's sympathy. She showed up to her murder trial dressed in black and with her hair and makeup done. She had her children sit in the front row during the trial, a reminder to the jury that her children would be orphans should they sentence their mother to die. The court also heard how the Alfonsis hadn't had a happy marriage. Ferdinando Alfonsi had been abusive, would often beat her children, and between 1932 and 1936, Stella and the children had lived with her mother in Bristol in order to escape them. When they returned to Philadelphia, money was tight. Ferdinando was involved with a bunch of illegal activities thanks to his new friend, Herman Petrillo, and Stella worried that if something were to happen to him, she and the children would be destitute. So she convinced her husband to take out a life insurance policy and had the insurance agents draw up several life policies for her husband, insisting that he should be covered for the highest possible amount. Maria Favato also took the stand and told the court that Herman Petrillo had tasked her with giving Mrs. Alfonsi the arsenic and had told her that Mrs. Alfonsi understood what had to be done. She's so guilty. Oh my god, is she just going to play the optics angle and actually get away with this? Once Ferdinando Alfonsi fell ill, Stella Alfonsi called on Dr. Henry de Alonso to come and see him since he'd been recommended to her by the Petrillos. Dr. de Alonso explained that when it asked what medicine she'd been giving to Ferdinando, she told him that the bottle was finished and that she'd already thrown it away, and when he insisted that Mr. Alfonsi had to be admitted to hospital, Stella refused, insisting that she was more than capable of looking after her husband herself. Dr. de Alonso later told Mrs. Alfonsi that he needed x-rays to be done, just so that he had an excuse to take Mr. Alfonsi to the hospital, and that is when he initially diagnosed Ferdinando Alfonsi with toxemia. Quote, "I found he had a temperature of 102 degrees Fahrenheit. His pulse was 120. His tongue was heavily coated, very coated. The soft palate was all swollen and red. His tongue was swollen. He could hardly swallow. His stomach was quite distended, a symptom of profound toxemia. I examined his eyes and found his pupillary reflexes were exaggerated. The whites of his eyes were red. His capillaries were standing out vividly. His upper and lower eyelids were puffed out, and his appearance was that of a person who had a severe toxic condition." George Meyer also testified regarding Stella's involvement in her husband's murder and told the court that Herman Petrillo had told him that Stella Alfonsi would take the kids to a movie at 8 o'clock that night, and she'd left the back door open so that he could easily sneak in and kill Mr. Alfonsi. Quoting again, "I was just so guilty." Quoting again, "I went around there at 8 o'clock to see whether Mrs. Alfonsi was really going to the show and whether she was really connected with this in any way. She went out at 8 o'clock and came back at 11:15. The next day, I gave Petrillo a story. I told him the husband hadn't been in the house, so Petrillo called a telephone number from the drugstore on Ontario Street and Kensington Avenue, and he asked for Stella Alfonsi. Someone answered the phone. Who it was, I don't know. And Herman said, 'Stella, the fellow is here, and he was around there last night and nobody was home.' Whoever was on the other end of the phone told him I was wrong and that the man had been there. Herman must have figured I had the wrong place because then he told me to go back again that night. He said I would know the place because the back fence was newly painted and a towel would be placed on it so I could not make a mistake. I went to the rear of the house that night and there was a towel there." Quote ends. This was the same evidence that had been presented at Herman Petrillo's murder trial, but unlike Herman Petrillo, Stella Alfonsi would be acquitted of all charges. Juries are dumb! I'm with you, Liam. This is ridiculous. You see, Mr. Alexander was a very good defense lawyer, and his defense case was built on the following facts. The incriminating insurance policy applications that had been presented to court all had been rejected by the insurance companies. Only one insurance company had been willing to insure Mr. Alfonsi, and while Mr. Alfonsi was in hospital, Stella hadn't been able to keep up with the premiums, so the policies had lapsed. When Mr. Alfonsi passed away, Stella didn't receive a cent, and Mr. Alexander argued that if her motive for murder was to claim the insurance money, why would she let the policy lapse? Because maybe she didn't have the money to pay it. She's like, I should have thought this through more thoroughly. Innocent somehow. Furthermore, Mr. Alexander had Maria Favato admit that they'd told the widows that the bottles of arsenic contained love potions, not poison, so technically, Mrs. Alfonsi hadn't bought poison from her, and it could be argued that she indeed believed that she was giving her husband a love potion. And then Mr. Alexander got everyone who'd witnessed Mr. Alfonsi's decline to admit that while her husband was ill, Mrs. Alfonsi had acted the part of the loving and concerned wife. To quote, Mrs. Alfonsi stood beside her husband the whole time. She stroked his forehead and put the hair back out of his face and patted his pillow. She seemed very anxious to make him as comfortable as she could. Yeah, if you murdered him, you would act like that. Because if you were like, f*** that guy, then they'd be like, it would be very suspicious. This is suspicious in its whole... It shouldn't count at all, is really what I'm saying. And when it was her turn to take the stand, the Record would report that a picture of poised, ebony-haired, olive-skinned Stella Alfonsi took the witness stand yesterday and gave the lie to those who accuse her of the poisoned murder of her husband. In a voice of utmost calm, her tones so low they could be heard only a few feet, she recited her denial and withstood a 2-hour and 20-minute cross-examination. She left the stand in the late afternoon without having lost her composure. Calmly, she declared the state's whole case against her was in a tissue of lies that every prosecution witness, including physicians, detectives, insurance agents, Secret Service agents, and other arsenic ring figures, had lied. Being cross-examined has got to be super intense. 2 hours and 20 minutes of just being like, did you kill them? Tell me how you killed them. And you're like, I did do it. I'll be like, okay, I did it. Can I go now, please? In his closing arguments, Mr. Alexander reminded the court that Mr. Alfonsi had told the detectives that he'd willingly signed up for the insurance policies. Ferdinando Alfonsi had been an associate of Herman Petrillo. Herman Petrillo had taken out his own policies against Mr. Alfonsi's life, had plotted to have Mr. Alfonsi killed, and he stood to gain the most from the death of Mr. Alfonsi. Furthermore, the prosecution's witnesses themselves were highly suspect. George Meyer was a notorious liar and convicted counterfeiter, and Maria Favato was a convicted killer. Stella Alfonsi, on the other hand, was a loving mother and a young, helpless widow. And Mr. Alexander asked the jury, are you going to let those two hang this woman? Mr. Alexander is an incredible defense lawyer. Holy shit. Even I'm like, no, don't know. I'm like, hang her. But it's very good lawyering, isn't it? So, just after 10:30 a.m. of the 28th of October 1939, the jury found that Stella Alfonsi wasn't guilty of murdering her husband and she was free to go. That leaves the murder trial of Rose Carina, otherwise known as the Kiss of Death. Oh my God, you're going into court. It's like, what's your... Please state your name for the record. I'm mostly known by my nickname. The Kiss of Death is guilty! The woman who not only murdered 3 men, but also plotted to murder Mr. Storaci and had assisted in poisoning several others. When the news of the Philadelphia poison ring first broke back in September 1939, Rose was already engaged to husband number 4, a 50-year-old widower named Isidore Trapea. Shortly after their marriage, a month later, Mr. Trapea started suffering from pains in his stomach and had gone to see several doctors about it. Rose had asked him to list her as a beneficiary in his $1,000 life policy, but he had refused. And on the 9th of December 1938, he came home to find that his wife, some of his furniture, and his first wife's wedding ring were missing. Rose had left him a note saying that she was going travelling, and when he went to report her disappearance to the police, he found that his lovely wife was suspected of being a part of the Great Arsenic Poisoning Ring, and that he'd just dodged a bullet. Can you imagine going there being like, highlights what my wife is? The police would be like, I've got some news, mate. Holy shit. Your life just got turned upside down in a day, bro. It took the FBI 6 months to track Rose down, and at 6 a.m. on the 18th of May 1939, they eventually found Rose Carina asleep next to her new boyfriend in an apartment in New Jersey. She was taken back to Philadelphia, and the local media reported that the now infamous kiss of death wasn't the femme fatale that they'd expected to be. Instead, she was a slightly overweight 42-year-old mother of 4 children. During her interrogation, Rose refused to cooperate. She attempted to end her life twice and even went on several hunger strikes. But by the time she appeared in court on the 27th of November 1939, Rose had changed her tune, and she fully intended to have all of the charges against her dropped as well. She had lost a lot of weight, went to court dressed in all black, and even added a black mourning veil to her outfit. Bro, she'd be like, what did that mix Mr. Alexander tell us to do? I'm just going to do that. She also reportedly claimed to have adopted Peter Stair's 4 youngest children in an attempt to garner the public's sympathy. And just like Stella, Rose petitioned the court and asked for a new, more competent lawyer to be assigned to her, none other than Raymond Pace Alexander. She's getting off with it, isn't she? He'd later explained that, I really felt sorry for this woman because I felt that the other defendants, especially the male defendants, had a gigantic frame up against her. She did not present as pretty a picture as Stella Alfonsi, but the fact that she had all those children made up for what her appearance lacked. Mr. Alexander be like, yo. She isn't as hot as the previous one, so it's going to be a little bit harder to defend her, but fortunately she's got loads of kids, and that also helps. Mr. Alexander is just like straight up telling it how it is. It's like, oh, well, she's uglier, so she's more likely to be convicted by a jury, because juries love pretty people. Quote continues, sympathy in the feeling that this woman with the attorney who she had, a very fine fellow but weak in presenting a case, would have gone to the electric chair, caused me to accept the case. Okay, so what's he saying? Oh, her previous attorney was so shit that she'd have definitely got executed. Mr. Alexander, while you are kind of a dick for for defending these people so well, everyone's entitled to defense and you're really good at it. In the end, the prosecution had only charged Rose with the murder of Peter Stair and started to explain the case that they'd built against her. Rose was a known associate of Paul Petrillo. She had been a part of a plot to murder Mr. Storace and had reportedly poisoned 2 of her previous husbands. Rose had even told Johnny Cacapardo that, I gave poison to my husband and they never found out. She's so getting off with it though, isn't she? The prosecution went on to explain that Rose had never moved in with Peter Stair and his family in 1934, and in January 1936, Peter had named Rose as the beneficiary of a $500 life insurance policy. On the 2nd of March 1936, he agreed to lease his grocery store to her for $25 a month and left Rose to manage it on his behalf. That June, he started vomiting and complained of intense burning in his throat and a severe pulling sensation in his throat and upper abdomen. None of the medications doctors prescribed worked, and by the end of June, Peter Stair was bedridden. One of his teenage daughters, Leah Stair, later explained, on the morning of June the 29th, we were downstairs in the store and Rose took a cup of black coffee up to my sick father. He began vomiting and complaining of the burning in his throat. Only this time the pains were much more severe and he did not recognize anyone. He just stared and threw up. He passed away in hospital later that night, and the doctors treating him listed his cause of death as diabetes. The prosecution further explained that when Peter fell ill in June 1936, Rose and Paul Petrillo started smuggling non-perishable stock worth hundreds of dollars out of the store and hid it in Paul's basement. Rose made a promissory note out to Paul Petrillo, stating that she owed him $500 and backdated it to March 1936. After Peter passed away, Rose inherited the store instead of Peter's children. Paul took the promissory note to his lawyer, and because Rose was unable to provide Paul with the $500 she owed him, she put the store and its depleted shelves up for auction. The public auction was held on the 11th of August 1936 and raised a total of $476, all of which went to Paul. He and Rose sold the stock they'd squirreled away and split the proceeds. Just like when it defended Stella Alfonsi, Mr. Alexander did his best to convince the jury that Rose Carina was a victim. He had Rose take the stand and explain how her mother had passed away when she was a baby. He had her explain how she'd taken care of Peter Stair and his 4 children for almost 2 years, playing the role of a devoted wife and mother, even though they'd never gotten married. Her neighbors even confirmed this, explaining that Rose was well known as being a devoted wife and mother, an unsurpassed cook and housekeeper, and a sympathetic friend. She even earned herself the name Rosie Bananas because she used to gift her neighbors with baskets of fruit when she went to visit them. Of course, when she was confronted with the charges against her, Rose pled her innocence and insisted that she hadn't killed Peter Stair or any of her husbands. She simply suffered from bad luck. Not only that, but the Petrillos, Morris Bulber, and the prosecution were trying to frame her. Unfortunately, the prosecution's extremely thorough autopsy report counted against them, since the amount of arsenic and antimony that they'd found in Peter Stair's body wasn't nearly enough to kill a person, just 0.164 and 0.0056 milligrams respectively. Mr. Alexander would tell the court that the amount of poison found in his body, quote, was a mere speck. The amount of antimony in the dead man would be lost on this pinhead. Can we believe this was a fatal dose? Did anyone testify that this could be a fatal dose? It could have come from anywhere. Rosary beads, the inside of the coffin, the tacks in the coffin, the nails, the metal covering, the metallic casket, the soil, religious medals, metal buttons, bolts, welding, paint, or varnish on the casket. Even the medicine that Peter Stair had been prescribed to treat his illness, since both arsenic and antimony were well known to be added to various medicinal mixtures, was brought up. Quote, if you believe that it could have come from any of these sources, if there is a reasonable doubt, you must acquit. Despite the overwhelming amount of evidence against her, the jury found Rose Carina was not guilty of murdering Peter Stair and she was free to go. It's always like, make sure if you do crimes that you can afford a really good-ass lawyer. The end of Arsenic Incorporated. Usually, I have a good idea of how and when I want to end a script. Each case follows a narrative thread, and just like every great story, each case eventually comes to a natural, neat end. The bad guy is captured, justice prevails, and they're sent to prison, where they'll either pass away or dance the hangman's jig, never to bother us again. But in the case of the Philadelphia poison ring, well, that turned out to be far more complicated than I thought it would be when I first stumbled across it, and its end is frayed into so many pieces that it's difficult to bring everything to a nice close. There is no nice close. The innocent people were guilty, and the guilty people were innocent. What the f***? So I'll start by explaining what became of some of our key players. Paul Petrillo was executed on the 30th... Oh yeah, some people did get their just desserts. He was executed on the 31st of March 1941, and Herman Petrillo was executed on the 20th of October 1941, after losing a number of appeals. Paul Petrillo didn't say a word as he was led to the electric chair, but Herman reportedly put up a fight and was still insisting on meeting with the governor when they flipped the switch on him. Morris Bulber died in prison on the 15th of February 1954, aged 70, after several of his parole applications were refused. After her release, Stella Alfonsi moved to New York and worked in radio for a time. According to her son, she was a real prima donna who thrived on the attention she received from men, but none of her relationships would last. She became paranoid when the first members of Arsenic Inc. were released from prison in the early 1950s and was convinced that they were coming for her. She had to be admitted to a psychiatric hospital for her safety, and she passed away there in 1989. Rose Carina ended up in low-income housing and lived with several men for the next few years. She died of cancer in 1954, but by then, all her children had abandoned her. Her eldest daughter, Grace, told George Cooper that her mother might have been loved by her neighbors, but that she was an abusive, neglectful mother behind closed doors. Despite all of that, her children all did well for themselves and led happy, fulfilling lives. Of the 29 defendants that D.A. McDevitt took to court, only 5 were allowed to go free. They included Stella Alfonsi and Rose Carina, 2 others who were freed because of jurisdictional issues, and 1 wife who was allowed to go free because there was insufficient evidence against her to prove that she'd been involved in the murder of her husband. The rest received sentences ranging from 10 to 20 years imprisonment or life sentences. Of those who received life, 12 would be paroled by April 1958, all of them elderly, and some of the victims of a court system that had discriminated against them simply because they'd been immigrants. As Liam explained, the trials of the Poison Wives were a farce, despite the fact that even D.A. McDevitt was convinced that most of the convicted defendants had actually been innocent. But as far as history is concerned, justice had been served, and 85 years later, the story of the Philadelphia poison ring is just another little fun footnote in the long and colourful history of America's first capital. God damn. What a miscarriage of justice. Wow. Dismembered appendices. After the death of her husband, Antonio Giacobbe, his widow Millie was convinced that he was haunting her basement. She went to see Morris Bulber about it, and he agreed to exorcise the ghost of Antonio. This involved putting a frog down in the basement before he let Millie enter the basement herself. Then, when the frog inevitably made a sound, like croaking or jumping or knocking something over, Millie freaked out and ran upstairs. Bulber killed the poor innocent frog and then ordered Millie to return to the basement. When she agreed that she didn't hear anything anymore, voila, Antonio had been exorcised. Okay. Number 2. Rose Carina didn't go into hiding on her own. She dragged her 11-year-old daughter Rita with her, and Rita was asleep on the couch when the FBI burst into their apartment on the morning of the 18th of May 1939. Rita would continue living with Rose after her acquittal, and at one point the two of them worked together as waitresses at the same restaurant. Rita finally managed to escape her mother when she got married to one of her clients, and just like all her other siblings, she would break off all contact with her alcoholic and abusive mother. Number 3. Not all the poison wives were in fact wives. The list contained at least one husband and one frustrated son-in-law, both of whom pled guilty to their crimes. Number 4. Johnny Coccapardo, the nephew who went to prison for shooting Millie Starace during his struggle with Paul, was transferred to Philadelphia prison for the duration of the poison ring murders so that he could testify against various members of Arsenic Inc. Turning state witness didn't help his cause much, though. He still served 15 years of his 30-year sentence before he was finally paroled. Wait, I'd say that helped a lot. He served half the time he was supposed to. Number 5. During the jury selection process for Rose's murder trial, Raymond Alexander rejected the majority of the jury members presented to them. The jury selection had already gone on well into the evening, and because they had limited time, court officials selected random people off the street and hauled them into the courthouse until they had enough for a full jury. You're just like, do. Oh, now you're on a jury. Come with us. You're like, hey, I'm busy. I'm going to work. What the f***? You need to send me a letter or something. I'd be like, I do not speak English much. Be like, let me go, please. I know not what you speak. Number 6. Liam mentioned another member of Arsenic Inc. that I didn't touch on, Josephine Sedita. This is because we barely have enough information on her. After the arrest warrants were issued, Josephine went into hiding, and she only re-emerged in 1945 once all of the trials had been concluded. She walked into the law offices of Raymond Alexander and handed herself over to him, requesting that he represent her as well. He did, and she was charged with fraud and practicing medicine without a license. She spent 2 years in prison, and then she was free to go. Number 7. The Secret Service was founded by Abraham Lincoln in 1865 to combat counterfeiting, and they wouldn't be tasked with protecting the president until 1901. They were a part of the Department of Treasury until 2003. What? Why is this here? Why are we talking about this? It's like, hey, fun fact! Number 8. You won't find a lot of information on the Philadelphia poison ring online. Wikipedia only lists one academic article that I was able to get my hands on, and managed to find at least 2 other limited sources that discussed Herman Petrillo's murder trial. But I was very lucky to stumble across George Cooper's very well-researched story and book on the case, Poison Widows, A True Story of Witchcraft, Arsenic, and Murder. It is the best $3.44 that I've ever spent, and I'd definitely recommend checking it out. Cool, do that. If you like today's episode, you're going to like that. Number 9. Don't tell Emma, but it's me, Liam, again. This time I've snuck in 2 cameos and stole one of her dismembered appendices, so the entirety of my 3,000-word rant earlier was focused on exploring why the jury is not just a terrible system, but that this case highlights why we cannot afford to trust juries. Well, we can blame the trust of the jury on the founder of the state where the majority of these murders occurred. You see, Pennsylvania was founded and named after a guy named William Penn, a famous Quaker from England. In 1670, Penn and another man by the name of William Mead were brought before the notorious Star Chamber in London and charged with unlawful assembly under the Conventicle Act, which made it illegal for certain religious minorities to assemble outside. Long story short, their jury's foreman was a man named Edward Bushell, who utterly refused to convict the 2 men, as the law had only targeted the 2 as they were Quakers. This led to one of the most famous cases of English law, which is called Bushell's case. In that case, an epic legend known as Lord Justice Vaughan ruled that juries could only be compelled by a court into returning a verdict that they did not believe in, and could decide whatever they wanted. The Bushell case also ruled that juries could also use whatever method they wanted to decide whether the defendant was guilty or not, leading to multiple juries flipping a coin in order to decide the accused's fate. And on that insane note is where we end today's rather lengthy episode. Thank you so much for being here. Hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And yeah, if you're watching on YouTube, like, subscribe. If you're listening on Spotify, a rating would do me a big favor. Thank you so much. And I'll see you next time.